Thank you, everybody, so much for coming, and good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the SENS Research Foundation's conference, Rejuvenation Biotechnology 2016. I really want to start by thanking the Buck Institute for hosting the conference with us this year. It's especially appropriate that we're here because a lot of what we'll be talking about involves building better collaborative bridges. So this really couldn't be better timed. I really only wish perhaps we had been doing this here sooner. For SRF, this is our 9th major conference, and over the years we've seen quite an astonishing change in our organization and in this conference. This is our first invitational conference today, and this is also our first live streaming conference. We are welcoming today thousands of viewers from 57 countries on the live stream. Hi. More significantly, though, what began in Cambridge more than a decade ago were biennial SENS conferences focusing on basic research, on academic projects, and questions about the feasibility of taking a damage repair approach to aging. The focus of discussion was on research that might prove this to be a relevant line of inquiry. The central question was if a rejuvenation field or industry could occur. Nobody at this conference today needs convincing that this is a relevant line of inquiry. Buck Institute started talking about establishing the geroscience field back in 2007. SRF messaging has been explicitly about building a rejuvenation biotech industry since 2011. And the focus over the next 2 days will be entirely on the word how. How to build clinical programs, how to make better biomarkers of aging, how to open new regulatory pathways, create better fundraising and investment business models. Now, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone here that world populations are aging. And this probably represents a pretty big coming healthcare crisis. It might be a little scary to see just how fast the oldest segments of our population will be growing. And there is a point of urgency in this slide that I do think is worth reiterating. Because we've known for a long time, this quote from AHRQ I think is about a decade old. We've known for a long time that the majority of healthcare costs are concentrated in a few key areas. And the most significant concentration of expenses is in patients where multiple chronic conditions are being managed. When the agencies that monitor healthcare costs make projections, their summaries suggest that they're using a fairly linear analysis. Healthcare costs in the US are projected to rise, and that's both in absolute terms and as a percentage of GDP. And most analyses talk about 2 major factors impacting this: a recovering economy and an aging population. But both factors are linked very tightly to traditional projections. If the economy turns down 5% next year, for example, most healthcare cost predictions are going to swing down 5% in lockstep with that. What's not so clear is how we're factoring in the additive impact of traditional medicine on the chronic diseases of aging. It's probably not controversial in this audience to say that with traditional, ameliorative, non-disease modifying approaches to age-related disease, we're getting very good at creating large populations of patients managing multiple conditions. And these patients are usually pretty unhappy, and they're always very, very expensive. And if we get to the place where every aged patient is 14 times as expensive as we expect, well, listen, there's a limit to how high you can build a skyscraper, because after a certain point, it's just all elevators to get people between the floors. In the same way, there's a limit to how high a percentage of GDP we can allocate effectively to healthcare. And after that, you're either going to need a more efficient system of managing chronic conditions, or you're going to have to start cutting back on providing state-of-the-art care. So the single focus of all the research, education, and outreach at SRF is to bring more attention to the possibility of treating age-related disease strictly by treating, removing, repairing, restoring, or remitting the damage that underlies and precedes disease, and controlling costs by creating more genuinely disease-modifying treatments for such conditions. And we're definitely seeing a change worldwide in the dialogue in aging research. Much more attention to the core concept of geroscience, that aging is the issue, and more interest in attending to aging as aging, so to speak. And while Dr. Barzilai's TAME trial may not be rejuvenation per se, it could also present the FDA with a new opportunity to address aging in a more head-on fashion, and that could eventually precipitate a broad change in regulation. But as an industry, it's still very discreet. The website fightaging.org recently did a survey of companies organized expressly around rejuvenation technologies. This is not a complete picture, to be sure. There are stem cell and tissue engineering efforts and a lot going into restorative therapy in certain diseases like Alzheimer's. But with all the potential, this is still not a very long list. And several of these are small startups around SRF technologies. And though those are growing fast, this is also certainly not a list of Unity-sized companies. That one stands pretty much alone. What will it take to make more? The NIH spends a lot of effort assessing their social and economic impact and second-guessing what measures of success they should be using: investment, technology outcomes, medical costs, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of strategy, but there's scant little about how to take a transformative stance in aging. We do the same thing in our organization, strategizing about industrial development, alliance building, and outreach. But maybe it's worth reducing to a simpler statement. Just like replacing all the self-analysis at the NIH with a Google search can lend a little clarity, in the end, it's all about the research commitment. Right now, we're measuring possible increases in treating age-related conditions in the trillions of dollars. But organizations like SRF and Buck are funding research in buckets of a few million a year. That's a ratio of millions to one. The core problem for us as organizations and for the initiation of an industry lies in figuring out how to strengthen a pipeline that is not yet receiving appropriate government attention. Because in this field especially, the investments that are going to create technology need to occur far upstream from the first investment rounds of a startup. And that's going to come from organizations like Buck Institute and organizations like SRF. The NIH is not yet driving this field. The budget for the Division of the Biology of Aging, only a small part of which goes into real translational efforts, by the way, it's been holding at about $180 million a year. It's actually down $700 in 2017. I don't know what they pulled out, somebody's desk apparently, but it just seems like a political signal that says, yeah, we don't quite get it yet. Little later today, I'm going to introduce our new campaign, Project 20 Run. Right now, I just want to note that the entire focus of that campaign will be to build new collaborative energy. Not just research collaborations, but working with other groups to create more energy and more resources for everyone. We're calling the next phase of our organization engagement philanthropy. But engagement isn't just a word we're using because we think our potential donors might like it. We're organizing everything we do to create an environment where we build more collective energy, because until there's more funding for the entire field, we're going to have to get extremely efficient with what we do have. That includes, for example, having a significant portion of our campaign dedicated to creating a center of excellence at another institution, to promote more cross-funding and to have more guidance from other voices on what we do and what we fund. We're hoping this first small center will be right here at the Buck, and we've started discussions about that. Now, this would be a 5-year, $10 million program, and that would only be a small fraction of Buck's budget. But the intent is not that we create a one-off, but rather a first experiment on how to use our support in ways that are more interactive with this organization and other organizations downstream. The bottom line is this: SRF is ready to lay every resource we have on the table to our partners, and we'll be doing everything we can to move more research down that pipeline, because frankly, we all haven't got that much time. Really, that's all I wanted to say to launch the conference. I'm going to ask Jerry Barrett to come up for a moment now and speak to you, but again, I want to thank you everybody for coming, and I really hope you enjoy the next day and a half. Thanks.